Lucy Lamb had her whole life ahead of her. She was just 17, full of dreams, laughter, and hope. But all of that was stolen by someone she trusted most. Lucy wasn't the type of person you'd expect to become the focus of such a devastating story. She was vibrant. Her laugh could light up a room, and she had an energy that made people feel instantly comfortable. Her teachers described her as brilliant. Her friends said she was loyal, and her family adored her. She dreamed big. Lucy wanted to be an architect. She'd spend hours sketching designs in her notebooks, imagining the kinds of buildings she'd bring to life one day. She had her sights set on college, with plans to leave her mark on the world. But behind that bright, beautiful exterior was a young girl carrying a weight no one should ever have to bear. For months, Lucy was stuck in a situation she didn't fully understand. She found herself trapped in a web of manipulation, spun by someone she thought she could trust. A teacher, a man she once believed wanted what was best for her. By the time people around her realized something was wrong, it was too late. Lucy wasn't just a victim of one man's betrayal. She was a victim of silence, a lack of accountability, and a system that failed her when she needed it most. Her story is heartbreaking, but it's important to tell. It's a story of trust, innocence, and how quickly those things can be destroyed when the people meant to protect us use their power to harm instead. This is Lucy Lamb's story. A story of dreams shattered, trust betrayed, and the devastating cost of silence. Lucy Lamb wasn't just another teenager. She was the kind of person you couldn't forget. Someone who left a lasting impression wherever she went. Bright, creative, and full of ambition, Lucy had a way of making the ordinary seem extraordinary. From a young age, Lucy gravitated toward art and design. Her bedroom walls were covered with her sketches. Blueprints of houses, intricate doodles of cityscapes, and vibrant paintings that showcased her love for color and detail. Her parents would often find her at the dining table, surrounded by pencils, rulers, and half-finished drawings, completely immersed in her work. She would say, "One day, I'm going to design a building that everyone will recognize. Something that feels like it belongs, but still stands out." Her teachers noticed her talent early on. One of them once told her mother, "Lucy has an eye for detail that you don't see in many students her age. She's got a gift." But it wasn't just her talent that stood out. Lucy was warm, approachable, and had a kindness that drew people to her. She wasn't loud or overbearing, but she didn't need to be. Her quiet confidence spoke volumes. Her family adored her. Lucy was the middle child, with an older brother and a younger sister. She had a special bond with each of them, but her relationship with her mother was something unique. Her mom once said, "She wasn't just my daughter. She was my best friend. We'd stay up late talking about everything. Her dreams, her friends, even the silly things like what color she wanted to paint her nails that week. She had this way of making you feel like what you said mattered." Lucy's friends echoed those sentiments. To them, she was the one who would remember their favorite songs or notice when they were feeling down. Zoe, her best friend, described Lucy as the glue that held everyone together. She recalled how Lucy would always doodle little pictures on her notebooks to cheer her up after a bad day. "She had this ability to make you feel like you were the most important person in the world," Zoe said. But Lucy's kindness wasn't just for those she knew. She had a habit of looking out for people who seemed left out. Whether it was inviting the shy kid in class to sit with her group at lunch or helping a struggling classmate with homework, she was the type of person who didn't want anyone to feel invisible. Her diary offers a glimpse into her inner world, a mix of excitement, self-doubt, and longing for something bigger. One entry reads, "I feel like I'm on the edge of something big in my life. Like everything I've been dreaming of is just within reach, and I can't wait to grab it." But there were also moments of vulnerability. In another entry, she wrote, "Sometimes I wonder if I'm good enough for the things I want. Like maybe I'm dreaming too big." It's a sentiment many teenagers can relate to, the push and pull between ambition and insecurity. Lucy's love for art wasn't just about her own dreams. She wanted to create spaces where people could feel happy and safe. She once told her art teacher, "I think buildings can tell stories. They can make people feel like they belong. It was clear that Lucy wasn't just designing structures. She was imagining lives within them. Her passion for her work and her deep empathy for others made her truly one of a kind. But what no one could have known at the time was how that same warmth and trust would eventually make her vulnerable. Lucy believed the best in people, even when they didn't deserve it. And in the end, that trust would be manipulated in the worst way possible. At first glance, Jericho Carter seemed like the kind of teacher every school wanted. He was in his mid-30s, well-dressed, with a confident, approachable demeanor that made him popular among both students and staff. To most people, Carter was more than a math teacher. He was someone who made an effort to connect with his students. He wasn't just teaching equations, he was mentoring minds. To students, Carter came across as someone who genuinely cared. He'd crack jokes to ease tension during exams, stay after school to help struggling students, and always seemed to have advice for those who needed it. Parents respected him. He had a way of putting them at ease during parent-teacher meetings, with his calm tone and carefully chosen words. He appeared invested in his role, and that made him stand out. Lucy first met Carter during her sophomore year, but it wasn't until the fall of her senior year that they began interacting more often. At the time, Lucy was juggling the stress of her college applications, keeping up with her extracurriculars, and maintaining her grades. One afternoon, she stayed behind after class to ask a few questions about a math problem. Carter, ever patient, took the time to walk her through it step by step, adding in little anecdotes about how math applied to architecture. For Lucy, that moment stuck. "He always made me feel seen, like I mattered," she told a friend later. And in her diary, she wrote about how Carter was one of the only adults who truly listened to her. "Most teachers just go through the motions, but Mr. Carter actually cares about what I have to say. It feels nice to be taken seriously." From then on, Lucy started spending more time in Carter's classroom. Sometimes it was for extra help with schoolwork, but other times it was just to chat. He had a way of making her feel at ease. He'd ask about her architectural dreams, encourage her to share her sketches, and offer compliments that seemed harmless enough at the time. "You have such a bright future ahead of you," he'd say. Or, "You're one of the most creative students I've ever taught." To Lucy, Carter felt like more than a teacher. He was someone she could turn to when things got tough. Her parents were supportive, but they were also busy trying to juggle work and raising 3 kids. Carter, on the other hand, always had time. When Lucy talked about her fears of not getting into her dream college or feeling overwhelmed by expectations, he listened. She began to describe him as her mentor to those closest to her. But while Lucy saw a safe space in Carter, others started to notice something different. Zoe, Lucy's best friend, later recalled, "At first, I thought he was just being a good teacher, but then it started to feel off. Like, why was he giving her so much extra attention?" Carter's interactions with Lucy weren't always in the classroom. Over time, their conversations spilled onto social media, where they'd exchange casual messages late into the evening. At first, they were about homework or college applications, but they gradually became more personal. He'd ask her about her hobbies, her favorite music, and her thoughts on life. What Lucy didn't realize was that this was the beginning of something dangerous. Carter was slowly crossing boundaries, but he did it so subtly that it didn't feel wrong to her. She wrote in her diary, "He just gets me. He doesn't treat me like a kid. It's nice to have someone who understands." The bond they built was carefully constructed by Carter piece by piece. He didn't push too far too fast. Instead, he built trust, made her feel special, and positioned himself as the person she could always rely on. For Lucy, who was already navigating the complexities of adolescence, this attention felt validating. But what appeared to be guidance and mentorship was something far more sinister. Carter wasn't just a teacher, he was a predator in disguise. And by the time Lucy realized it, she was already deeply entangled in a situation she couldn't escape. First, everything seemed innocent. Carter was the attentive teacher, and Lucy was the eager student. But the relationship that began as mentorship slowly started to take on a different tone, one that was harder to define but impossible to ignore. Lucy's diary entries reflected that slow, insidious change. At first, I thought he cared about me, but now I'm not so sure, she wrote in one entry, the neat handwriting trailing off into a mess of scratched-out thoughts. Another entry read, "Sometimes I feel like I owe him for everything he's done to help me, but I don't know why it feels so heavy." The shift was subtle, so gradual that Lucy didn't recognize it as anything unusual. The after-school tutoring sessions, which had once felt like extra help, started running later and later. Carter would make excuses to keep her longer, telling her, "I just want to make sure you're completely confident in this material. I know how much your college dreams mean to you." But the conversations weren't always about math. Over time, they started veering into more personal territory. Carter would ask questions that felt harmless at first. "How are things at home?" Or, "Are you happy with your friends? They treat you right, don't they?" He framed these moments as concern, but each question chipped away at Lucy's boundaries. Then came the compliments. Carter's words started lingering in Lucy's mind long after their sessions ended. "You're so mature for your age, Lucy. You're not like the other students." Or, "I don't know how someone so young can be so insightful." These remarks made Lucy feel special, seen, even important. And for a teenager navigating the uncertainty of adolescence, that feeling was intoxicating. Soon, it wasn't just words. Carter began giving Lucy small gifts. A book he thought she'd like, a set of pencils for her sketches, even a coffee on a morning when she seemed tired. Each gesture was framed as kindness, and Lucy convinced herself it was harmless. "He's just a nice person," she told herself, even as her unease began to grow. But her family started noticing changes, even if they didn't fully understand what was happening. Lucy's mother, Layla, recalls that her daughter's behavior started to shift in small but noticeable ways. "She stopped eating dinner with us," Layla said. "She'd just pick at her food or take it to her room. At first, I thought it was just teenage stuff, maybe stress from school or college applications. But then her phone. She was always glued to it, always texting, always smiling at the screen. I didn't think much of it at the time. Now, I wish I'd asked more questions." Lucy's father, Matthias, echoed similar concerns. "She used to love talking about her art, showing us what she'd been working on. But then, it was like she just shut down. She stopped sharing. I figured she was just growing up, trying to be more independent." In her diary, Lucy wrote about the conflict she felt inside. "Sometimes I think I'm reading too much into it. He's just a good person who wants to help me succeed. But then he says things that make me second-guess myself. I feel like I'm constantly on edge." Her best friend, Zoe, started noticing changes too. "She wasn't the same Lucy anymore," Zoe said. "She'd cancel plans, stop answering my texts, and when we did hang out, it was like she wasn't really there." By the time her unease turned into fear, she felt too trapped to speak out. She didn't want to disappoint him, and she didn't want to risk anyone finding out. Her world was slowly unraveling, one thread at a time. And while those closest to her could sense something wasn't right, no one knew the full extent of what was happening, or the danger Lucy was truly in. Secrets have a way of growing heavier over time. For Lucy, the weight of her secret wasn't something she could carry alone, but sharing it didn't make it any lighter. Lucy first confided in her best friend, Zoe Simpson, late one night after they had been hanging out in Lucy's room. At first, Lucy hesitated, nervously fidgeting with the bracelet on her wrist. Zoe noticed the unease. "You've been acting weird lately," she said, trying to coax her friend into opening up. Lucy avoided eye contact, finally whispering, "I think I'm seeing someone." Zoe's curiosity lit up, but as Lucy continued to explain, her smile faded. "It's not like he's like other guys. He understands me," Lucy said, her voice both defensive and uncertain. She avoided naming Jericho Carter at first, but when Zoe pressed for details, Lucy reluctantly admitted the truth. Zoe was stunned. "Your teacher?" Zoe asked, her voice a mix of shock and disbelief. Lucy immediately tried to justify it. "It's not like you think," she insisted. "He's not like that. He's different. He actually listens to me. He cares." Zoe didn't know what to say. Part of her wanted to tell Lucy how wrong it was, but another part could see the fragile look on her friend's face, like she was balancing on the edge of a cliff. "I didn't want to push her too hard," Zoe later explained. "She seemed so sure, but at the same time I could tell she was scared. It was like she was trying to convince herself more than me." Lucy's emotions were a tangled web. On the surface, she clung to the idea that Carter cared for her in a way no one else did. She'd smile when his name came up, showing Zoe texts he had sent, filled with compliments and flattery. But in private, when she was alone, it was a different story. Lucy's diary painted a clearer picture of her inner turmoil. "He says he loves me, but sometimes I wonder if he really means it. I feel like I'm living a double life, and it's exhausting. I don't know how much longer I can keep this up." Her struggles began to affect her daily life. Lucy started skipping outings with her friends, making excuses about being too busy or too tired. Zoe later admitted, "I didn't realize how bad it had gotten. She stopped coming to our group hangouts and just disappeared. It was like she was pulling away from everyone. At home, things weren't much better. Lucy, once so close to her family, began avoiding them. Her father, Matthias, remembered how she'd quietly slip away to her room after school, claiming she had homework. She used to spend time with us, watch TV with her siblings, but then she just started shutting herself away. I thought it was just normal teenage stuff, but now I know it was more than that." Her mother, Layla, noticed other changes. She seemed distracted all the time. I'd ask her how her day was, and she'd just mumble, "Fine," and go back to her phone. She wasn't my Lucy anymore. Lucy's isolation wasn't just physical. Mentally and emotionally, she was pulling further and further away from the people who cared about her most. She felt trapped. She admitted this to Zoe during one of their rare conversations. "I feel like I've made a mistake," Lucy said, her voice breaking, "but it's not something I can just take back. If people find out, I don't even want to think about it." Zoe tried to comfort her, but Lucy's walls were already too high. She was carrying this huge burden, and I could see it eating her alive, Zoe said later. But no matter what I said, she wouldn't let me help her. She thought she had to handle it alone. Even Carter's words, which had once been a source of comfort, began to feel suffocating. "You know I'm the only one who really understands you," he'd tell her during their late-night conversations. "No one else will see this the way we do." Those words, though framed as reassurance, only deepened Lucy's sense of isolation. She felt like she couldn't confide in anyone else, and as much as she wanted to leave the situation, she didn't know how. The guilt was overwhelming. In her diary, she wrote, "I feel like I've messed everything up. I don't know how I let it get this far. But I can't stop now. It's too late." Lucy's secret was no longer just a part of her life. It had become her life. It dictated her every move, every thought, every emotion. And as the days turned into weeks, the burden grew heavier, leaving her feeling more isolated and hopeless than ever before. The truth has a way of surfacing, even when you try to bury it. For Lucy Lamb, the breaking point came not with a loud revelation but through a quiet moment. A vase of flowers delivered to the wrong place at the wrong time. It started with a small gesture from Jericho Carter. He had sent Lucy flowers, a gesture he likely saw as romantic, but one that would soon unravel the fragile life she had tried so desperately to keep intact. The flowers arrived at Lucy's workplace, a local coffee shop, addressed to her. But it wasn't Lucy who received them. It was her manager. Curious, the manager called the flower shop to confirm the sender. When the name Jericho Carter came back, alarm bells rang. The manager knew the name didn't belong to a boy from school, but to someone much older. That single delivery set everything in motion. The manager reached out to the school principal, who in turn called Lucy's grandmother, Layla, to share the troubling news. For Layla, it was a moment of confusion and disbelief. She had always seen Lucy as bright and focused. The idea that she could be involved with her teacher seemed unimaginable. That night, Layla confronted Lucy, holding back tears as she asked, "What's going on, Lucy? Why would your teacher be sending you flowers?" Lucy froze, her face pale as she stumbled over her words. "It's not what you think," she began, her voice trembling, but she couldn't bring herself to explain further. Her grandmother pressed gently, desperation creeping into her voice. "Lucy, please talk to me. Tell me the truth." Lucy's carefully guarded emotions finally broke. Tears streamed down her face as she sobbed. "I can't explain. I don't even know how it got like this." She retreated to her room, slamming the door behind her. For Layla, the conversation left her shaken and uncertain about what to do next. The situation quickly spiraled from there. Word began to spread around the school. Whispers in the hallways turned into full-blown gossip, and Lucy became the target of relentless rumors. Students speculated about what had happened between her and Carter, with some blaming Lucy and others mocking her for being the teacher's pet. The cruelty of her peers left Lucy feeling exposed and humiliated. Everywhere she turned, she heard laughter, whispers, and insults that cut deep. She overheard a group of students in the hallway saying, "She probably thinks she's special, like she's better than the rest of us. It's disgusting." Lucy tried to keep her head down, but the weight of it all became too much. She sought refuge in the one person she thought would understand, Zoe. One evening, Lucy showed up at her best friend's house, eyes red and swollen from crying. Sitting on the edge of Zoe's bed, Lucy broke down. "I don't think anyone will ever see me the same way again," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "I feel ruined, Zoe, like I don't even exist anymore. I don't know how to fix this." Zoe tried to comfort her, but the words felt hollow. "You're still Lucy. You're still my best friend," she said, wrapping an arm around her. But Lucy shook her head. "You don't get it. No one does. People only see what they want to see, and now they'll only ever see this. I'll never be able to escape it." At home, Lucy's family watched helplessly as she pulled further away. Her father, Matthias, remembered, "She used to talk to us about everything. But after this, it was like she was behind a wall we couldn't break through." Her mother, Layla, reflected on the guilt she felt. "I didn't know how to help her. I tried to ask her what was going on, but she'd just say she was tired or that it didn't matter. I could see she was hurting, but I didn't know how to reach her. I felt like I failed her." Lucy's siblings noticed the change too. Her younger sister, Layla Jr., recalled, "She wasn't Lucy anymore. She didn't laugh or joke around like she used to. She just stayed in her room all the time. It was like she disappeared." Even Carter's influence didn't offer the comfort it once had. He sent her messages telling her to stay strong, and that no one would understand what they had. But instead of feeling reassured, Lucy felt trapped. In her diary, she wrote, "I thought he cared about me, but now I see I was just a fool. I don't know how to get out of this without breaking everything." As the days turned into weeks, Lucy's once bright personality faded into a shadow of its former self. The breaking point wasn't just the flowers or the rumors, or even the confrontation with her grandmother. It was the cumulative weight of it all, a burden no one her age should ever have to carry. She was slipping further and further away, and the people who loved her were powerless to pull her back. The weight of Lucy's pain became unbearable on a quiet, unassuming night. It was the kind of evening her family wouldn't have thought twice about at the time, calm, routine, and ordinary. But by the end of it, their world would shatter forever. Lucy had spent most of the day in her room, as she often did in those final weeks. Her mother, Layla, had knocked on her door earlier, asking if she wanted to come down for dinner. Lucy's voice, soft and distant, replied, "I'm not hungry. I'll eat later." Layla hesitated outside the door for a moment, sensing something was wrong but unsure how to approach it. "I'll check on her again before I go to bed," she told herself as she walked back downstairs. But she wouldn't get the chance. Hours later, when the house had gone quiet and everyone else was settling in for the night, Lucy picked up her pen and opened her journal. The journal that had been her silent confidant through it all. Her struggles, her heartbreak, her confusion. This time, though, it wasn't just an entry. It was a goodbye. "I thought this was love, but I see now it was a lie. I let it destroy me. I'm sorry for everything. I'm sorry I wasn't stronger." Her handwriting faltered near the end, as if the words themselves had drained the last of her strength. She left the journal open on her desk, alongside a small photo of her family from a happier time. When Layla went upstairs to check on her daughter, it was already too late. She knocked softly on Lucy's door. "Lucy? Are you awake?" When there was no response, she pushed the door open. At first, she thought Lucy was asleep, her body curled up on the bed. But as she stepped closer, the truth became clear. The scream that followed was raw and uncontainable, a sound that came from the deepest part of a mother's soul. Layla collapsed beside her daughter, shaking her, begging her to wake up. "No, no, no. Lucy, please, don't do this to me. Please." Her husband, Matthias, rushed upstairs at the sound of her cries. When he saw what had happened, he froze for a moment, unable to comprehend the scene in front of him. Then he moved toward Layla, pulling her into his arms as she sobbed uncontrollably. Layla later described the moment through tears. "No parent should ever have to hold their child that way. She was just gone. I kept thinking, maybe if I'd gone in earlier, maybe if I'd pushed her harder to talk to me. But it was too late. It was too late." Lucy's siblings, still too young to fully grasp the enormity of what had happened, stood in the doorway, watching the scene unfold. Her younger sister whispered, "Mom, is Lucy okay? What's wrong with Lucy?" The question was like a knife to Layla's chest. The days that followed were a blur of grief, disbelief, and crushing guilt. Layla would spend hours in Lucy's room, sitting on her bed, holding her pillow close and rereading the journal she had left behind. Each entry was like a piece of a puzzle that Layla wished she'd seen sooner. "I thought I was protecting her by giving her space," she said later. "I thought she needed time to sort through whatever was bothering her. But now I realize she was drowning, and I didn't see it. I didn't reach her in time." Lucy's best friend, Zoe, was inconsolable. When she heard the news, she couldn't believe it. "I should have pushed her harder to tell someone. I should have done something. She told me she felt trapped, and I thought she'd be okay. I thought she'd figure it out. But she didn't." At the funeral, the family placed some of Lucy's sketches alongside her casket, a tribute to her dreams, the ones she would never get to achieve. Her artwork, once a source of pride and joy, now served as a reminder of everything she could have been. In the weeks that followed, Lucy's story began to spread. People who had mocked her or dismissed her struggles now expressed their regret. But for her family, the apologies were hollow. Nothing could bring Lucy back. Her mother's final words about that night were haunting. "I keep replaying it in my head, wondering if there was something I could have said or done to stop her. But the truth is, she was in so much pain, and I didn't see it. I didn't see it until it was too late." Lucy's death left a hole in the lives of everyone who knew her. It wasn't just the absence of her presence. It was the loss of her warmth, her laughter, and the light she brought to every room she entered. For her family, her friends, and even those who only knew her from a distance, the grief was overwhelming. It wasn't just mourning her life. It was grappling with the question of why no one could save her. Her father, Matthias, struggled to find the words to describe his pain. Sitting in the living room, surrounded by Lucy's unfinished sketches and school projects, he held up one of her drawings, a beautifully detailed design for a house she'd been working on for months. "She wasn't just a victim," he said, his voice breaking. "She was a daughter, a sister, a friend. She was ours. And I want people to remember her for who she was, not just what happened to her." Matthias paused, looking down at the sketch in his hands. This is what she wanted to do. She wanted to make the world beautiful. And she would have done it too. She would have changed everything. For Layla, the pain was sharper, more visceral. She couldn't stop replaying the memories of Lucy's childhood. The way she used to run into her arms after school. The nights they stayed up late talking about Lucy's dreams. The mornings she'd hear her humming in her room while getting ready for class. "I can't stop thinking about how I didn't see it," she said through tears. "How could I not see it? She was hurting so much, and I didn't know." Layla kept Lucy's journal close to her at all times, reading and rereading the entries that revealed the depth of her daughter's struggles. She thought she wasn't enough, Layla said. She thought she'd ruined everything. But she didn't ruin anything. She was everything to us. And now she's gone. For Lucy's younger sister, Layla Jr., the loss was confusing and devastating. She looked up to Lucy, admired her talent and kindness, and couldn't understand why her big sister wasn't there anymore. "I don't get it," she told her mother one night. "Why didn't Lucy tell us? We could have helped her." Her words were simple, but they carried the weight of the family's collective guilt. Lucy's best friend, Zoe, found it hard to even speak about her loss. When she did, her words came out halting and filled with regret. "She always thought she wasn't enough," Zoe said. "But she was everything to us. She didn't see how much she mattered. I miss her laugh, her smile, everything." Zoe talked about the little things she'd come to miss the most. The way Lucy would doodle on her notebooks, leaving tiny flowers or stars in the corners of every page. The way she'd always remember everyone's favorite songs and make playlists for them. The way she made people feel like they belonged. But Zoe couldn't shake the guilt. She told me she felt trapped, and I didn't know what to say. I thought she just needed time to figure it out, that she'd get through it. But I should have told someone. I should have done something. I'll never forgive myself for not helping her. At school, the mood was somber. The gossip and whispers that had plagued Lucy during her life now turned into apologies and regret. Students who barely knew her left notes and flowers at her locker, while teachers spoke quietly about how they could have done more to recognize the signs. One teacher, Mrs. Santos, remembered Lucy as a bright, quiet girl with a spark of creativity. "She had so much potential," she said, shaking her head. "I wish I'd paid closer attention. I wish I'd known she was struggling." For the Lamb family, the weeks after Lucy's death felt like an eternity. Every corner of their house reminded them of her. The art supplies on her desk, the family photos on the wall, the smell of her favorite perfume still lingering in her room. Layla couldn't bring herself to pack up Lucy's belongings, so everything stayed exactly as it was, frozen in time. The grief extended beyond the family, rippling through the community. Lucy's story became a symbol of how easily someone can slip through the cracks, how trust can be weaponized, and how silence can be deadly. But for those who loved her most, the pain wasn't about symbolism or lessons. It was about the girl they had lost, the one who sang off-key in the car, who gave the best hugs, who made everyone around her feel like they mattered. Her father summed it up best. "She was ours, and now she's gone. But I don't want her story to just be about what happened to her. I want people to remember who she was. She was special. She was loved." Lucy Lamb's death was more than just a personal tragedy. It was a reflection of the systemic failures that allowed her suffering to go unnoticed. The very people and institutions that were meant to protect her had missed the signs, leaving her vulnerable to manipulation and harm. Jericho Carter's behavior wasn't sudden or overt. Like many predators, he relied on subtlety, carefully crossing boundaries one step at a time. Experts describe this process as grooming, a calculated effort to build trust, isolate the victim, and gradually push past what's appropriate. But while the signs may seem obvious in hindsight, they're often overlooked in the moment by peers, families, and even the institutions responsible for safeguarding young people. Dr. Ariane Cantrell, a psychologist specializing in adolescent trauma, explained the challenge of recognizing grooming behaviors. "Victims like Lucy are manipulated into silence," Cantrell said. "It's not just about the perpetrator gaining their trust. It's about making them believe that they're complicit, that they'll be blamed or judged if they speak out. That's the power predators have. They create this illusion of control and mutual secrecy, which makes it harder for victims to seek help." For Lucy, the isolation created by Carter's manipulation was compounded by the lack of intervention from those around her. Subtle changes in her behavior, her withdrawal from friends and family, her sudden reluctance to join group activities, were visible but not fully understood. "We tend to chalk these things up to normal teenage behavior," Dr. Cantrell added. "But when a young person suddenly shifts from being outgoing and engaged to withdrawn and secretive, it's a sign that something deeper might be going on." Lucy's school also played a role in missing the warning signs. Carter was a trusted member of the faculty, and his charisma and rapport with students shielded him from scrutiny. Teachers and administrators often view their colleagues as allies, not as potential threats, which can make it difficult to question their behavior. Taylor Nielsen, a former educator-turned-child advocacy specialist, weighed in on the institutional blind spots. There's this assumption that if someone's part of the system, whether they're a teacher, a coach, or a counselor, they're automatically trustworthy. But that's a dangerous assumption to make. It creates an environment where predators can operate unchecked, especially if their actions seem small or insignificant on the surface. Nielsen pointed to Carter's gradual grooming process as a textbook example of how predators exploit these blind spots. It's not like he suddenly crossed a major boundary overnight. It was little things, keeping Lucy after class, giving her extra attention, messaging her outside of school hours. None of these things seemed alarming on their own, but together, they painted a clear picture of inappropriate behavior. Lucy's school had policies in place to protect students, but those policies were rarely enforced. Teachers weren't trained to recognize grooming behaviors, and students weren't given safe, accessible ways to report concerns. In Lucy's case, by the time her relationship with Carter was discovered, the damage had already been done. One of the biggest barriers to intervention, experts say, is the stigma surrounding these situations. Victims often fear that they won't be believed, or worse, that they'll be blamed for what happened. Lucy herself expressed this fear in her journal, writing, "If anyone finds out, they'll just think I'm stupid. No one will understand." This stigma also extends to families, who may feel guilt or shame for not recognizing what was happening. Lucy's mother, Layla, reflected on this in one of her interviews. "I keep thinking, why didn't I see it? Why didn't I ask more questions? But the truth is, I didn't even know what I was looking for. I didn't know how to recognize that something was wrong." Dr. Cantrell emphasized the importance of education and awareness. Parents, teachers, and students all need to understand what grooming looks like and how it works. It's not always as obvious as people think. Sometimes it's just a feeling that something isn't right, and that feeling needs to be taken seriously. Lucy's story became a catalyst for conversations about these systemic issues. Advocates pushed for better training for teachers and school staff, stricter policies to prevent inappropriate relationships, and more resources for students to report concerns without fear of retaliation. But for Lucy's family, those changes came too late. Her father, Matthias, summed up their grief and frustration in one heartbreaking statement. "We trusted the system to protect her, and it didn't. It failed her in every way. And now we're the ones who have to live with that." Lucy's death was a wake-up call, a painful reminder of the cracks in the system that allowed her to fall through. And while her family hopes her story will lead to change, they know nothing will ever bring Lucy back. Lucy Lamb's story is one that will never be forgotten. It's a story of pain and betrayal, but it's also a story of resilience, of how even in the darkest moments, her light continues to shine through those who remember her. As candles flicker at a vigil held in Lucy's honor, her friends and family gather to celebrate her life. The air is filled with quiet sobs and shared memories, but also a sense of purpose, a collective determination to ensure that what happened to Lucy never happens to another child. Lucy's laughter echoes in the memories of those who knew her best. Her talent, her kindness, and her dreams are preserved in every brushstroke of her paintings, in every line of her sketches, and in the hearts of those who loved her. Zoe, her best friend, stands among the crowd, clutching one of Lucy's drawings. "She didn't see how special she was," Zoe says, "but now it's up to us to make sure no one forgets." Her mother, Layla, holds Lucy's journal close to her chest, her voice steady but full of emotion. "She was more than what happened to her. She was smart, creative, kind. She wanted to make the world better. And even though she's not here, I believe she still can. Her story can save lives. It can wake people up." Lucy Lamb's story is heartbreaking, but her legacy can spark change. The narrator says, their tone soft yet determined. "No child should ever feel alone in their pain, and no predator should go unchecked. Speak up. Reach out. Protect those who can't protect themselves. If you found this story meaningful, please take a moment to subscribe to the channel, like this video, and share it with others. Together, we can bring awareness to stories like Lucy's and help prevent tragedies like this from happening again.